We have a worldwide problem with antibiotic resistance. These multi-drug resistant organisms, also called superbugs, are causing infections and deaths. We're going to talk about the current state of superbugs across the world. We'll take a look at how much closer we are coming to an antibiotic apocalypse. In other words, a situation where antibiotics no longer work to stop bacteria and cure infection. So why is this a problem? Well, if you end up with an infection from an organism that is resistant to antibiotics, you may end up seriously ill and die. Cut 1. Well, after decades of antibiotic use, we now have increasing antibiotic resistance. This just shows how many travelers there are. About 1 billion people travel internationally per year. 350 million people coming into the U.S. via about 300 different ports. So I don't need to remind you how quickly COVID-19 spread throughout the world. A similar thing is happening with antimicrobial resistance. There is an initiative across the world to combat antimicrobial resistance. It has been estimated that by the year 2030, 10 million people could die each year from these superbugs. That's more than the people that died from COVID. The first comprehensive update of worldwide resistance was published in Lancet 2022. This paper is going to be reviewed. They used 2019 data, reviewed over 471 million records from more than 200 countries. And what they found is that 4.95 million people died from antimicrobial resistant infections. Now, if these bacteria were sensitive, 1.27 million people would not have died. And that's a lot. So where are the highest rates of death from these infections? Let's take a look. I'm Dr. Deborah Murray, infectious diseases physician. Please subscribe and hit like and notification as it really helps my channel. So where are the highest rates of death from infection, and what types of infections are causing death? Well, you can see here the deaths per 100,000 population is here on the y-axis, and then you can see the different countries here. And West Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest death rate. And this is the total death rate from the infections. And this is the death rate that resulted from the bacteria being resistant. So this number of infections could have been prevented. Remember, that's about 1.27 million could have been prevented in total if the bacteria were still sensitive to the antibiotics. So Western Sub-Saharan Africa, largest amount of deaths, and Australia, that's Australia, New Zealand area, they have the lowest amount of deaths per 100,000. Here is high income North America, that includes the US. The Caribbean is here, and it's interesting to note that North Africa and the Middle East has somewhat of a lower death rate in that area as well. So what types of infections are people dying from? Well, lower respiratory tract infection. This means pneumonia. That's the highest number. And here's the deaths from infections and the deaths from the organism being resistant. But bloodstream infections are right up there with it, and with the confidence intervals, who's to say which one is greater? But in any event, then there's intra-abdominal infections. Other types of infections are listed here. So what bacteria caused most of the infections in 2019? Well, there's 6 common bacteria causing most of the infections: Escherichia coli, Staphylococcus aureus, Klebsiella pneumoniae, Streptococcus pneumoniae, Acinetobacter baumannii, and Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Again, the deaths are listed here. Here are those 6 organisms, the deaths from infection, and here are the deaths because the organism is resistant. Okay, let's talk about the locations with highest MRSA or methicillin resistant Staph aureus, resistant E. coli, and carbapenem resistant Acinetobacter. So I'm going to take you through these. This is for MRSA. Here on the top panel is the raw data that they've collected from clinical labs and clinical review and history. So, and on the bottom panel is their modeled estimates. What I want you to take note of is the percentage of isolates with resistance. Purple is very low, and then it fades into aqua, and yellow becomes more resistant, and then orange and deep red are very high resistant levels. Okay, so for the raw data for MRSA, you can see higher resistant levels in the northern part of Africa / Middle East, some higher resistance over in India, Asia, and in terms of the modeled estimates, there's a little bit of a difference in regards to MRSA, but the gist of it is the ones that are, relatively speaking, the ones with lower resistance are similar, and higher resistance is still showing up. Now, in regards to 3rd generation cephalosporin resistant E. coli, here's the raw data again on the upper panel, and again here's the modeled estimates. You can see that the modeling was pretty close in this area, and you have higher levels of resistance in India and the Middle East, and lower levels of resistance in the US and in the Australia region. For carbapenem resistant Acinetobacter baumannii, again, Russia has very high levels of resistance, high levels in the Middle East as well as India, and in terms of the modeled estimates, relatively speaking, fairly similar. And you can see real high levels in Russia again, India, some higher levels in the Middle East, and again, Mexico is higher than the United States. So this tells you that the modeled estimates are fairly good, but you really need to remember that this is a very fluid situation. Things are changing all the time with resistance, and I probably don't need to remind you about the international travel and how that's playing a big role in transporting microbes all over the world. And so we all need to take a look at this problem and take stake in this problem throughout the whole world.
So what can we do about this problem with antibiotic resistance? Well, across the world, we need to work together to prevent infections, including hospital-acquired infections, and decrease antibiotic use. What can you do personally? Well, first and foremost, you need to take good care of your overall health. That means exercising, maintaining a healthy body weight, and ensuring that your blood sugars are reduced, particularly if you have diabetes. Studies have shown over and over again that elevated blood sugars increase your risk of infection. So if you have diabetes, get it under control. Next, avoid touching your face, especially when you are out traveling or outside your home. Always wash your hands before eating or even before you blow your nose. You can go to the CDC website and look at different travel advisories if you're traveling overseas, And they may have particular other recommendations that may be helpful, such as certain vaccinations that can help you prevent infection. Now, you don't need to be like me. I admit it. I had got my PhD in microbiology before I did med school, or at the same time actually, but before I went into infectious diseases. So I understand these organisms. I know how they work. I know how easy it is to pick them up. I admit it. I'm a little OCD. I don't touch my face. I try to avoid touching my face completely. And, I wash my hands before I eat. I wash my hands too much. You can see they're kind of wrinkly. I'm blaming it on that. Well, anyway, so, if I'm overseas, I wouldn't really eat fresh fruit or vegetables unless I'm the one that's washing them. So finally, talk with your clinician about avoiding antibiotic use. You don't need an antibiotic for the common cold or flu. And please see my prior videos on antibiotic resistance. It goes into more detail, like how does this happen and how does it affect you, and the importance of avoiding antibiotics. And if you want a little laugh, you can take a look at a YouTube short. A lot of people didn't like my singing about avoiding antibiotics. But anyway, I had fun with it. Hey, thanks so much for joining me today. You have a great day. And safe travels if you're traveling. Boo.